end of this lecture. All right, so we've talked about the male reproductive system, and we've talked about the pathway of sperm, right? Starting from the testes, then to the epididymis, and then out the vas deferens, ejaculatory duct, and then the urethra of the penis. Then we also talked about the female reproductive system, right? Starting off with the ovaries producing the egg being released into the fallopian or uterine tubes, then traveling down to the uterus and then out the vagina. Okay? Now, if we want to have the sperm fertilize the egg, do you guys remember where does that take place?
The uterine tube.
Yeah, the fallopian or the uterine tubes. Yeah, so we're going to talk first about that process of fertilization, a little more detail. After fertilization takes place, we'll go through really quickly the 3 trimesters of the pregnancy and kind of what are some key things that should occur. And then finally, wrap up with the stages of childbirth. Right. Okay, so fertilization. When we say fertilization, we're talking about the sperm actually meeting the egg. The important thing is that when the sperm meets the egg, they fuse together. In other words, the sperm is going to enter the egg, and their DNA is going to fuse. In other words, they'll join together. So, we know that they're going to meet in the uterine tube. Here you have the sperm coming in, and it's actually entering the egg on the bottom. This is the cartoon version of sperm trying to enter the egg, and notice one made its way in. So once the sperm makes its way in, its DNA is going to fuse with the egg's DNA. And remember, when an embryo is first formed, it's actually just a single cell, the egg with the sperm that entered it. And that single cell is called the zygote. Do you guys remember how many chromosomes should this cell have?
23.
How many chromosomes should any body or
46.
any cell in your body have for the most part?
46.
46, right? So when we talk about this first cell of the new baby, it's also going to have 46 chromosomes, 23 which came from the dad's sperm, and then 23 which came from the mom's egg. Okay? So 46 in total for this new cell. Okay, that picture up there is actually a real image, an actual microscopic image of the sperm going to meet the egg. So, do you guys remember how many sperm get ejaculated from the male at like any one given point in time? Yeah, about 50 million, 50 to about 80 million. How many of those sperm do you think actually make it to the finish line being the egg?
A few. But one,
What?
only one.
Out of 50,
pieces.
like what, 1,500,000? Only about 50 to 100. Yeah, that's why you got to start off with 50 million, right? Because by the time it makes it all the way through the pathway, sperm get lost, they go up the wrong fallopian tube, they die off because of the acidity, they're immobile, right? So you start off with 50 million, but at the end, only about 50 to 100 make it to the actual outside of the egg. And then how many sperm actually make it inside the egg?
One.
Just one. Yeah? So really it's kind of like the strongest sperm should win, right? It had to have gone a long way to actually win out of the 50 to 80 million. So once that sperm makes it in, the egg puts up a protective barrier so that no other sperm can enter, right? So just one sperm gets to enter. If by chance 2 enter at the same time, it actually normally spontaneously aborts. Because if 2 sperm enter at the same time, then you have 23 chromosomes from one, plus 23 from the other sperm, which is 46, plus 23 from the mom's egg, which is 72. No good, right? If it's not 46, it aborts.
What about when a woman has twins?
Yeah, so let's talk about twins. So 50 to 80 million sperm come out of the male. How many eggs get released from the female?
Usually one.
Should just be one, right? Right ovary and left ovary, so they take turns. 1 month the right goes, the next month the left goes, and so on. In the case of fraternal twins, where the siblings aren't identical, what do you think happens with the female?
2 eggs.
She releases 2 eggs. So normally it's the left and the right ovary will both release an egg at the same month. So 2 eggs come down and they both get fertilized. And therefore you have 2 embryos and therefore 2 babies developing. That would be the case of fraternal twins. Identical twins, as you get this one zygote, right? Like normal. And this one zygote is going to start to multiply through mitosis. But it should still be 1 embryo and then 1 baby. In identical twins, for some reason, they don't know why, this one zygote, when it goes through mitosis and becomes 2 cells, right? Those 2 cells, for some reason, separate and then develop into 2 individual embryos and therefore 2 individual babies. But because they came from the same zygote, the same DNA, they're identical. Yeah, so those are 2 types of twins.
So I have a question. So for the in vitro, is it because they're already fertilized eggs?
Yes, so in vitro is when they do the fertilization outside the body. They do it in a petri dish, and they have the female's egg. Usually they harvest about 6 to 12 female eggs, and then they inject the sperm into the egg. So now you have this zygote, but it's in a petri dish. And they'll do this, they'll try to get maybe 6 to 12 of them, right? Now, then you go and say, okay, we want to put this embryo into the female's uterus. Do you think they only put 1 embryo in the female's uterus? Usually not, because just 1 embryo, there's a chance that embryo might not stick to the endometrium. So they usually put in maybe 2 or 3, with the hope that at least 1 sticks. However, if you put in 3 embryos and 2 of the 3 stick, now you have twins, right? Or you put in 3 embryos and 3 of the 3 stick, now you have triplets. So that's why when a woman or a couple goes through in vitro fertilization, the chances of twins are a lot higher because they are putting in more than 1 embryo. Yeah, great question.
We were talking about the identical twins. So I was thinking, like, would it be possible for the right or the left ovary to release 2 eggs? Or is it like, it's always 1, right? And when you said fraternal, they'll both release them.
Right?
And then so for identical twins, it's not the case where like, where one side releases 2 eggs, it's just like mitosis.
For identical, they have to come from the same exact starting zygote. That first cell has to be identical. Whether the woman released 1, 2, or 3 eggs, it doesn't matter. For identical, it's only that 1 zygote that now gives rise to 2.
And it's
embryos.
using that fused DNA.
Exactly.
to explain the type of
Yep.
baby.
So with Siamese twins, it doesn't quite split.
Yes, exactly. So usually when you have twins, they develop into 2 embryos and then 2 separate babies, right? Sometimes they even both have their own placenta and their own sacs. But with Siamese, when they normally it's just like identical twins and they start to go through mitosis, they divide, they become 2 separate individuals, but they still share some common cells, right? Which is why they don't split completely. Yeah. Great question. All right. Okay, but in the normal process, female releases 1 egg, 1 sperm enters that 1 egg, you get the first cell, the zygote, and then the zygote starts to go through mitosis. After the zygote goes through mitosis, it's called the embryo. And so what happens is, remember, the embryo is in the fallopian, or the uterine tube. Ultimately, that embryo has to make its way where?
To the uterus.
To the uterus. Yep. And so that embryo is going to go to the uterus. And importantly, when we look at the 3 trimesters, I'm really going to point out 2 key things to make sure that the embryo is going to survive. At about day 6, 6 days after the fertilization, it takes about 5 or 6 days for that embryo to travel down the fallopian tubes and make its way to the uterus. At about day 6, the embryo has to implant into the endometrium. Why does it have to go into the endometrium? What's in the endometrium?
The blood vessels.
All the blood, which is all the nutrients, right? So if that embryo doesn't implant, it's not going to get access to those nutrients in the blood, right? If it doesn't implant, it's going to pass through the uterus and then go out the vagina, and then pregnancy will not occur, right? So that's critical. Now, the endometrium, yes, it has a lot of nutrients, but it's not going to be providing the nutrients for the baby throughout the entire pregnancy. It only provides the nutrients for about the first month. So, by about 4.5 weeks, the embryo is actually no longer relying on the endometrium nutrients. Instead, you'll see the placenta start to develop. So all of this around the baby right here is the placenta. And now the placenta has all of the rich blood and nutrients provided for by the mom. And that's what we were talking about in the fetal circulation, how we said, oh, right, baby can't get its oxygen from its lungs because it's not using it. Instead, baby gets the oxygen from the mom's placenta. That's just one of the many nutrients that the baby is going